Some of what I'm going to tell you has happened and other things are yet to be. So grab a mug and snuggle up. I'm going to tell you a story. The pear on the ground, a forbidden fruit in the tree, choosing to exalt self instead of bending the knee. And as a result, all creation was subjected to futility in hope that a promised one would come and bring together what had come undone. And God made a promise to Abraham, leave your home and your land and I'll make you father to generations. But the old man had no heir and he took what wasn't his and made a son for God-ish. God said, not like that, like this. Wait for it. Isaac, the child of promise, begot Jacob, renamed Israel. And a nation was born, and due to famine dwelled in Egypt, where God's promise of abundance made the Egyptians misbehave. And they did what weak leaders do when all Israel was enslaved. More than 4 centuries of weeping reached heaven's gate, but God was already preparing a leader to change their fate. Moses, hidden in the Nile in infancy, would split a sea during his ministry, save a nation miraculously, lead the people faithfully, but not the promised one be. He received God's law, then passed the reins to Joshua, who crossed the Jordan to Canaan to take the land, God's plan, but like their forebears, they turned from light, lost their sight, started doing wrong, but calling it right. So God raised up judges to bring peace to the land. Othniel, Ehud, Shagmar, Deborah, Gideon, Tola, Jer, Jephthah, Ibzan, Elon, Abdon, Samson. Othniel was a warrior. Deborah was a prophet who didn't play. Gideon laid out fleece, and Ehud, I'd rather not say. Samson loved riddles and women and wine, a mashup of Rambo and Jason Bourne sent to the Philistines. But he too turned from truth, rejecting the vow of the Nazirite. And as a result was emptied of God's power, lost his hair and eyesight, but finally he repented and prayed to the God he had denied. Remember me again, strengthen me one more time. And God did, and that prayer judged 3,000 enemy lives. Then came Naomi, renamed Mara for her pain, dead husband, dead sons, grief heaped with shame. But God blessed her big in the most unlikely way, with a daughter-in-law, Ruth, who kinda saves the day. And then there was Hannah, who like Mara was heavy-hearted and empty. And she prayed for God to fill her, and girl, did he. Her son Samuel became a great prophet who would advise the king. And that brings us to David, who did all the things. Shepherd, poet, musician, warrior, selfish, adulterous, lying, murderer, repenter, who forms a monarchy by uniting Israel's 12 tribes, bringing wealth and prosperity and holiness to covenant lives. His complicated son Solomon builds the temple, and Israel is established. But when the next gen gets the throne, instead of using the power to serve, Rehoboam tries to grab it. And the kingdom rips. 10 tribes split, call themselves Israel, make a capital in Samaria, and mix the worship of Yahweh with everything else. And king after king doesn't do what they should. So shout out to Queen Esther for being brave and looking good. And God raised up prophets to call them back. Elijah, Elisha, Amos, Hosea warned of coming attack. The southern kingdom, Judah, sent Isaiah and Micah too. And finally, God sent Assyria to lay waste to the north in 722. The southern kingdom now remained, and they needed more than luck. So God sends the prophets Joel, Micah again, Zephaniah, and Habakkuk. You saw what happened up north and to our ancestors in the wilderness. There was grief and anguish apart from God, and we're made for Sabbath rest. Stop and return. Repent, rebuild. Be faithful and obey. But enslaved by stony hearts, they couldn't change their pace. And in 586 BC, Babylon laid waste. And the promise given to Abraham lay in pieces on history's floor. God had kept his side, but the people wanted more. As if that's even possible. And dear listener, that was the end of God's beloved Israel. Well, it should have been, but it wasn't. People don't keep promises, but God keeps covenants. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, David were cool, but God never planned for the dust of the earth to do what only he can do. These people were pointers, signs pointing up. They weren't the Lion King, just little cubs. And God had one last promise to keep, so he sends his son. Wonderful counselor, mighty God, everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. And earth's shadow spell is broken. by a cry piercing night's calm, not a war cry or a battle cry, just a baby who needs his mom. And the child grew in stature and wisdom and grace. God who dwells with man, Emmanuel is his name. He preached and he taught, flipped tables and sought his Father in prayer, healed the lame, deaf, and oppressed. Come to me, you are burdened, and I will give you rest, for I am gentle, humble, and promise to love you best. Well, the first to hear were the first to reject this unconventional Messiah and his strange Jesus sect, and with deceit and lies, false witnesses, and a corrupt trial, nailed him to a cross and left him to die. If your Messiah, save yourself, they spat in hate, too blinded by sin to feel heaven and earth reverberate. But as holy blood began to drip, death began to lose its grip. And with one last breath of the sun, it was death that came undone. The sacrificial system of bulls, goats, rams had been pointing all along to God's holy lamb. One man gave us sin and another took it away. Adam lost paradise, but Jesus is the way. Sin created the chasm that kept God from us, and it has now been filled with the love of Jesus. And the greatest wound of creation was healed. It's true. God, through Christ, made the old brand new. It's not human power. It's always God's grace. The life we now live is one of faith. And this gospel grew wings as one person told another, and a new family was made of random sisters and brothers. People like Mary, Peter, Philip, and John each played a role passing it on. So did Paul and Apollos, Timothy and Barnabas, and Lydia and Priscilla, Aquila, Silas, and Erastus. Moses set free the enslaved of one nation, but Jesus breaks the bonds that enslave all creation. He was the one promised from the beginning, returned to heaven, sent his spirit to keep us from sinning, repent and believe because he's coming again with angels in glory to unveil a redeemed creation. The story began with a couple in a garden with a tree. It ends with myriads of people worshiping in a garden city. The place is illuminated by Christ alone and filled with joy and light and laughter and song. And the king sits on the throne smiling in this land of no tears. And he looks at you and says, I'm really glad you're here. And you'll join with the angels singing the church's song, how he got us over, around, and through and was with us all along. I hope I've told the story well. Now you get to choose if it's fact or fairy tale. Read the unabridged version for yourself and behold, the greatest story ever told.